Hello and welcome back to our course on Adobe Dreamweaver CS6. In the previous section we created our first web page. It's using one of the default web pages provided by Adobe, so the content really doesn't relate to our website at the moment. The first thing you should do when you've created any web page is to save it. So that's what we're going to do first in this section. Now I know that this one hasn't been saved because it's still got the name up there of Untitled 2. If I click on File, one of the options on the File menu is Save As. Now Dreamweaver knows which site we're working on. I'll show you that in just a moment. But it knows where to put the pages that we're working on, and it's already opened the Springs Park folder. Now the page I've just created I'm going to use as my home page. Now you're probably familiar with what a home page is from your own use of the internet, but it's the page from which all of the others sort of spread out in a website, and we normally create the home page first. The thing also to bear in mind with the home page is there is a convention about what to call a home page. Now in fact there are a number of different options depending on the website and the technology that's used to build it. But by default, with a site being created with Dreamweaver, we're going to start with the convention here, which is to call the home page index.html. So I go in here and I'm just going to change the name to index.html. Now I'm going to make a very important point, one which I can't really overemphasize the importance of. Although it's not necessarily a very straightforward story, particularly the history of this is not that straightforward, there are some very important conventions about what you call the files in a website. Not just the HTML pages, but things like image elements and so on. And to some extent, despite what other people may tell you, the safest rule to work on when you're working on websites is that file names should always be in lowercase. Now it is true that there are some situations where this rule doesn't need to be followed, but for maximum flexibility, keep your file names in lowercase. So you see there index.html, I've done it all in lowercase. The second important point in relation to that is to avoid using special characters in file names. So don't use colons, slashes, periods, apostrophes. If you need a separator, use an underscore, not a space. And a third important point, if you're working on a Mac, the file names cannot be more than 31 characters long, so don't go overboard with the length of the file names either. Now where I am wanting to use more than one word in a file name, I'm going to follow the convention of using underscores. So index.html is a good file name. That's the file name for my home page. So all I have to do now is click on Save. Okay, having saved my page, I can see the name up here now, index.html. I haven't currently got a title. Now, as I said to you much earlier on, the title is nothing to do with the file name. It is important in relation to search engines and one or two other things, so I'm going to put a proper title in here. I'm going to put my title of Springs Park homepage, and now I'm going to close the page. So click on the close there. Do I want to save changes? Yes, well I've just changed the title. Click on yes, and my home page is saved and closed. Now having closed that page, let's look at a couple of ways that we could return to working on that page again. Now on the welcome screen you can see in the left hand column open a recent item now has an entry of Springs Park index.html. So that's the name of the site and that's the name of the file. So that would be an easy way to open that page up again. I also mentioned to you earlier on that there is a way of knowing which site you're working on. Once you've got more than one website that you're maintaining, you're going to need to know which one you're working on at any time. If you go back up here to the Site button and click on that drop down. We didn't use Site before. Let's look at Manage Sites. We have a list of the available sites. Now, there's only one, Springs Park, but that is of course the one we're working on at the moment, so that's the one that is selected. So that's the site I'm working on. If I went on File, there is an Open Recent option which lists the recent file, and there of course is index.html. Note there's an option here, Reopen Documents on Startup. That's quite an important option. What that means is that if I've got, say, 2 or 3 pages that I'm working on and I want to close, or I need to close Dreamweaver, perhaps I'm going to have my lunch or I finish work for the day, if I leave them notionally open in Dreamweaver when I shut Dreamweaver, when I start it up again, they'll all be reopened again. Now that might sound like a slightly unsafe thing to do, but it's absolutely fine because Dreamweaver looks after whatever work in progress you've got. Always a good idea to do a save before you do that though. And then apart from Open Recent, there is an Open option. If I click on Open, depending on the site that I'm working on, it will default to opening within the root folder for that site. So there's the Springs Park site, and there's my only page at the moment, which is index.html. So I could click that, click Open, and my page is open again. Now, in a little while, I'm going to start to put some of my content onto this page and probably introduce 1 or 2 other pages a little bit later on as well. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit more about the workspace, because there are a couple of very important things to cover here before we go too much farther with the site. Now, the first thing I want to do is to point out that we're in Design View, and if I switch to Code View, you won't be surprised to see that there is a lot of HTML code. This simple page, which really hasn't got very much on it, but it has a lot of HTML code. If I go to Split View, you can see side by side the HTML code and a view of the page as well. Now let's just go back into Design View for a moment and let's look. This begins with the words instructions up here, and then the content goes right down there to backgrounds, and you note that around the document window edges I've got scroll bars. Now the scroll bars let me go left to right in that case, and up and down in that case. Now the reason I have the scroll bars is that the whole of this page is not visible in the document window at once. And one of the things I can use, which will often help me, is the ability to zoom in and out of the page I'm working on. Now, this is not the same as changing the size of the page. This is to do with being able to see more or less of the page. If you are working on something with very detailed content, you probably need to zoom in. If you just want to see the overall shape of a page, you maybe want to zoom out. Now, down at the bottom here on this bar, there is a set magnification button. It defaults to 100%. That's what it's set at the moment. I'm going to go to 50%. And at 50% I can see much more of the page. I can see all of the width. I can't quite see all of the height. Let's go for 25%, and now I can see the whole of that page. As you can see, it's roughly speaking a portrait page, but you can now see all of the page. So I can use this magnification control to zoom in or zoom out as required. There's also a zoom in and zoom out button here. So the zoom in is control with an equal sign, and the zoom out is control with a minus sign. And then there's also a little zoom tool here. If I click that, click on there, that zooms in as well. So these are different ways of zooming in and zooming out of the image. If I zoom in, say, quite a bit to 150%, there's another tool here, the hand tool. If I click that hand tool, I can actually drag using the mouse to a different part of the page if I want to work close up and I need to look at some detail. Now I'm back at the 25% magnification, and I'd just like to show you one other thing. If you're uncertain about the significance of these fixed width pages and the different sizes of PC screens and browsers, hopefully this will help to explain it to you. At a magnification of 25% and at a normal size of window here, then I can see all of the page. On the status bar here, next to these other controls that we've just looked at, in the middle there is a set of buttons that let me choose a window size to look at this page in. One of them is mobile, the mobile size of 480 by 800. In fact, I can choose from all sorts of sizes of display here, so feature phone, smartphone and so on. So I'm going to just stick with that one for the moment. And zoomed in, 25% magnification, this page all shows on a phone with a screen resolution of 480 by 800. If I were to show the page at 100% magnification, so the page at its normal size, I can see that on a smartphone or this type of phone, the whole of the page would not be visible. Now the significance here is that we have chosen a fixed width, so the width of the page will not be adapted by the browser to fit the device and the browser settings. It will always be at our fixed width. So that means that on this type of phone at a 100% magnification, the whole width of the page will not be visible. And that's the most important point to get from this. With fixed width, there are going to be smaller devices that the whole of your page at 100% magnification will not be able to show. Now, depending on the device, of course, you may be able to zoom in on the device, but then of course what you're looking at is how small the text will become and so on. So it's quite a complex subject, but in principle it's quite straightforward. You're either going to go for fixed width and accept that on some devices with some settings you're not going to be able to see it all, but you are going to be able to control very much the layout of the pages and so on, or you go for the variable, the liquid width settings, and then you need to look at the design to make sure that in these settings your pages still look okay. Now that is one of the big advantages of Dreamweaver CS6. You have these previewing options, these multi-screen preview options that let you look at what your pages are going to look like in all sorts of different situations, and that's really one of the great new features which is really going to help you when you're building websites that you're hoping people are going to use on all sorts of different devices. Okay, I hope that I've established some of the main issues there that we're going to need to keep track of as we work through the course. We will be returning to fluid grid layout later on, which addresses many of these issues in really a very clever way. In the meantime, let's stick with our fixed width page for the moment, and let's concentrate on putting some content in. Well, in terms of putting content in, and especially given the content that we get by default with this page, which really is of no interest to somebody wanting to come to a nature park, but some of the information is helpful. How do we put some content on the page? Well, it's pretty straightforward actually. If we say take this particular line here which says instructions, one very simple straightforward way is to delete as usual using the keyboard and then type something like and there we are, we've started to put some content in. In the next section we'll add quite a bit more. I'll see you then.